When a group of remarkably efficient thieves orchestrated a daring attack on a millionaire's daughter, they never anticipated that Keanu Reeves, lurking just nearby, would turn the heist into an astonishing display of justice and ingenuity. The first light of dawn broke through the fog that clung to the surface of the lake, where Emily Harrington stood alone at the end of a weathered dock. At 34, she was returning to her family home for the first time in nearly a decade. The weight of her camera hanging from her neck like an anchor. As a documentary photographer whose work appeared in prestigious publications, she had captured suffering and beauty across the globe, yet found herself unable to frame the landscape of her own past with the same clinical detachment. "You can't. Hide behind that lens forever," her therapist had told her before she left London. Perhaps that was true, but the camera provided a barrier, a way to witness without participating. Through its viewfinder, the world became manageable, contained. The Harrington estate, with its imposing Victorian architecture and sprawling grounds on the outskirts of Boston, was exactly as she remembered, picturesque, insular, and laden with ghosts. Emily had fled this place after completing her studies, determined to outrun memories that now drew her back with the persistence of tide to shore. Her father, Richard Harrington, had spared no expense preparing for her homecoming. The mansion, once quieter during her absence, now bustled with activity, as staff ensured everything was perfect for the prodigal daughter's return. Yet, as Emily gazed across the lake that bordered their property, she felt a sense of unease that no amount of preparation could dispel. "I thought I'd find you here." The voice startled her. Jack Callahan stood a few feet away, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, shoulders hunched against the morning chill. At 55, the ex-intelligence agent had aged well. The same watchful eyes, the same measured stance. Once her father's most trusted colleague, now a harbinger of something Emily couldn't quite discern. "Old habits," Emily replied, lowering her camera. "I needed to see it again." Jack nodded, understanding immediately that it meant the lake. The site where everything had changed years ago, the keeper of secrets that had driven her away. "Your father's anxious to see you," he said. "But there's something you should know first." "What could be so important it couldn't wait until I've at least had breakfast?" Emily asked, studying his face for clues. A shadow crossed his features, quick as cloud passing over sun. "I've brought someone with me, someone who's going to be staying at the estate for a while." The weight of unspoken words hung between them. Emily felt the familiar urge to retreat behind her camera, to transform this moment into something she could control, edit, and file away. Instead, she forced herself to remain present in the discomfort. "Who is it, Jack?" "His name is Keanu," Jack replied, his voice lowered, although they were alone. "He's not a conventional security consultant, but he's the best at what he does." "Security? Since when does the estate need extra security?" "That's a conversation you need to have with your father," Jack said carefully. As he turned to leave, Emily felt the past and present collide with nauseating clarity. She had returned to reconnect with her father, to finally make peace with the place she once fled. But as she watched Jack walk away, she understood that this homecoming would require more than observation. The story waiting to be uncovered would force her to step from behind the lens and confront the fracture lines that had divided her family, the ones that began years ago, when a single moment of violence changed everything. The Harrington mansion seemed to grow more imposing as Emily approached, its Victorian towers and ornate facade a testament to her father's success in real estate development. Once bright and welcoming, the house now felt like a fortress, beautiful but impenetrable. In the grand foyer, Richard Harrington waited, his tall frame still commanding despite his 68 years. His face, lined with the years of Emily's absence, broke into a genuine smile that momentarily erased the tension between them. "Emily," he said, opening his arms. Their embrace was brief but sincere, the awkwardness of estrangement tempered by blood ties that neither time nor distance could sever. "You look well," he said, stepping back to examine her. "As do you," she replied, though she noted the subtle signs of strain around his eyes. Richard gestured toward the man standing silently in the shadow of the staircase. "This is the associate Jack mentioned. Keanu?" Emily turned to face the newcomer, struck immediately by his presence. Keanu was not what she had expected. Dressed simply in dark clothing, he carried himself with a stillness that seemed almost preternatural. His face, framed by dark hair that fell just below his jaw, revealed little, but his eyes, they observed everything with an intensity that made Emily instinctively raise her guard. "Why is he here?" Emily asked her father directly. Richard's expression tightened. "Jack believes we need additional security. I've decided to trust his judgment." "Security against what?" Emily pressed. "Perhaps we should discuss this over breakfast," Richard suggested, his tone making it clear the conversation in the foyer was over. The dining room, with its hand-painted ceiling and views of the estate grounds, had always been Richard's favorite place for important discussions. As they settled at one end of the massive table, Emily noticed how Keanu positioned himself, not seated with them, but standing at a perfect vantage point to observe both the room's entrances and the windows overlooking the garden. "There have been threats," Richard finally admitted after the staff had served and withdrawn. "Initially, I dismissed them as the usual hazards of business." "What changed?" Emily asked, watching her father carefully. "They became more specific, more personal." Richard's gaze flickered toward Jack, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "They mentioned you, Emily." The revelation struck her with unexpected force. "Me? Why would anyone—" "Your return was announced in several publications," Jack interjected. "Someone has been monitoring the Harrington family very closely. They know your movements, your schedule. And you think this consultant can help." Emily gestured toward Keanu, who remained impassive despite being the subject of their conversation. "I don't just think it," Jack replied. "I know it. Keanu has a particular set of skills. He's not just here to protect, he's here to identify the threat." Emily studied Keanu with new interest. There was something in his composed demeanor that suggested depths beyond the simple role of bodyguard. "And you agree to this arrangement?" she asked him directly. For the first time Keanu spoke. His voice was measured, unexpectedly gentle. "Your safety matters to people who matter to me." The simplicity of his answer disarmed her momentarily. Before she could respond, the doors to the dining room opened, and Sophie Wells, Richard's executive assistant, entered with a stack of folders. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. "But there are contracts that need immediate attention before the Westlake meeting." Richard sighed. "The business never stops. Emily will continue this conversation later. In the meantime, please consider what we've discussed." As her father left with Sophie, Emily found herself alone with Jack and Keanu. The silence that settled between them was heavy with unspoken questions. "This is absurd," Emily finally said. "I've spent years in actual conflict zones. I don't need a shadow." "This isn't about your capabilities," Jack replied. "It's about an unknown threat that has already penetrated further than it should. Keanu stays. That's not negotiable." The firmness in Jack's tone surprised her. In her childhood memories, he had always been the jovial counterpart to her father's seriousness, the uncle figure who brought gifts from far-flung places and told stories that made the world seem vast and full of wonder. "What aren't you telling me, Jack?" Emily asked directly. Jack's expression softened slightly. "Your father has enemies, powerful ones. Usually, that's just business. But this feels different, personal. Because of me." "Maybe," Jack admitted. "Or maybe your return just provided the perfect opportunity for someone who's been waiting." Emily turned to Keanu, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "And what do you think?" Keanu's dark eyes met hers without hesitation. "I think you should show me the lake." The request caught her off guard. "The lake? Why?" "Because that's where you went first," he answered simply. "It matters to you, which means it could matter to whoever is watching." The lake stretched like a silver mirror beneath the afternoon, sun surrounded by the carefully maintained woodlands of the Harrington estate. Emily walked along the private shoreline with Keanu following at a respectful distance, close enough to intervene if necessary, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. "You're not what I expected," Emily said over her shoulder. "What did you expect?" Keanu asked. "Someone more obvious, earpiece, sunglasses, visible weapon, the usual security theater." A slight smile touched Keanu's lips. "Theater is exactly what it would be." "So, what's your approach? Blend in and hope no one notices?" "I don't blend in," he replied, the simple statement carrying a weight of self-awareness. "I observe, I anticipate. The best protection isn't about stopping attacks, it's about preventing them from happening at all." Emily studied him with newfound curiosity. Despite her initial resistance, there was something compelling about his philosophy. "And how do you do that?" "By understanding patterns. People telegraph their intentions long before they act." Keanu stopped, scanning the tree line with practiced precision. "Like now, we're being watched." Emily instinctively reached for her camera, the urge to document overriding her alarm. "Where?" Instead of answering, Keanu moved with sudden purpose toward a cluster of trees to their right. By the time Emily caught up, he was examining broken branches and disturbed undergrowth. "Someone's been here regularly," he said, pointing to cigarette butts half buried in the soil. "Recently, too." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the breeze coming off the lake. Could be anyone. Ground staff, maybe. "In a spot. With a direct view of the dock? With these?" Keanu held up a small object that Emily recognized with professional immediacy, a high-end camera lens cap. "This isn't staff, this is surveillance." The realization that someone had been photographing the estate, photographing her, shifted something fundamental in Emily's understanding of the situation. This wasn't her father's usual business paranoia. This was real. "We should tell my father," she said, reaching for her phone. "Not yet," Keanu countered. "If we react openly, we lose the advantage of knowing what they don't think we know." "Which is what, exactly?" "That they've made a mistake." Keanu pocketed the lens cap. The first one, but not the last. As they walked back toward the mansion, Emily found herself reassessing everything. The strange tension in the house, Jack's concern, her father's uncharacteristic deference to outside security advice. Whatever was happening went beyond simple threats. "You said you understand patterns," Emily said as the mansion came into view. "What pattern are you seeing here?" Keanu was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Preparation. Patience. Personal motivation. This isn't about money or business." "Then what is it about?" "That," he said, "is what we need to discover before they make their next move." The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine. Emily divided. Her time between reconnecting with her father, conversations that carefully avoided the years of absence, and working on a photography portfolio she'd promised to a New York gallery. Keanu remained a constant presence, though he had an uncanny ability to make himself nearly invisible until needed. Richard threw himself into preparations for a charity gala to be held at the estate, an annual tradition that Emily had missed for years. The event would bring Boston's elite to the Harrington mansion, a perfect opportunity to showcase both Richard's philanthropy and his daughter's return to society. It was also, as Keanu pointed out during a security briefing, a perfect opportunity for whoever was watching the estate to gain access. "We should cancel," Jack argued, spreading blueprints of the property across Richard's study. "Absolutely not," Richard countered. "Canceling would show weakness. Besides, the foundation depends on this fundraiser." Emily, who had been silently observing the debate, finally spoke. "What if we use it? Make it a controlled environment to identify potential threats?" All eyes turned to her in surprise. "What do you mean?" Jack asked. "I mean, if someone wants access to us, to the estate, let's give it to them, but on our terms. With Keanu and your team watching every moment." She looked to Keanu. "Isn't that better than waiting for them to choose the time and place?" A glimmer of approval flickered in Keanu's eyes. "It could work, if we're prepared." Richard studied his daughter with newfound respect. "When did you become so strategic? Conflict zones teach you to think differently about security," she replied simply. As the men returned to their planning, Sophie entered with a delivery, an elegant white box tied with black ribbon. "This just arrived for you, Emily." Hand-delivered. Emily opened the box carefully, aware of Keanu moving closer, his alertness palpable. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a single black rose and a card bearing 4 typed words. "Welcome home. Remember me." The room went silent as the implications settled over them. This was no longer an abstract threat. It was a direct message. "Do you know what this means?" Jack asked quietly. Emily stared at the black rose, a memory stirring at the edges of her consciousness. "I'm not sure," she said, though something about the message resonated with a forgotten fear. "This changes things," Richard said, his face pale. "Emily, perhaps you should return to London until—" "No." Her response was immediate and firm. "I'm not running away. Not again." Keanu took the card, examining it with careful attention. "The paper is expensive, custom-made. This isn't impulsive, it's planned, personal, and meant to invoke a specific reaction." He looked at Emily. "Is there anyone from your past who would send this? Someone who might feel forgotten?" The question triggered a cascade of memories Emily had spent years suppressing, fragments of a night she had tried desperately to erase. A black rose had been the signature of someone she once knew, someone she had last seen on the night everything changed. "There might be," she admitted, her voice barely audible, "but it's impossible. He's gone." "Who?" Richard demanded, a new edge of fear in his voice. Emily met her father's gaze, seeing in it a reflection of her own buried guilt. "Marcus Shaw, but he died in the boating accident." The police confirmed it. Jack and Richard exchanged a glance so brief that Emily might have missed it had she not been watching carefully. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, the photographer's instinct for hidden truths sharpening her perception. Richard sank heavily into his chair. "The body was never found, Emily. The investigation concluded he must have drowned, but without a body there was always doubt," Jack finished. "We didn't tell you because you were already traumatized. The doctors advised against any additional stress." The revelation left Emily breathless, as though she'd been physically struck. "You let me believe he was dead. For 15 years you let me believe that." "We thought it was true," Richard insisted. "There was no reason to think otherwise." "Until now," Keanu interjected, holding up the black rose. "Someone wants you to remember Marcus Shaw. The question is, why now? And what exactly do they want you to remember?" The night of the charity gala arrived with a sense of inevitable confrontation. The Harrington mansion was transformed, every room aglow with candlelight, flowers adorning every surface, music floating through the halls as Boston's elite arrived in their finery. Emily moved through the crowds in a midnight blue gown, her camera left behind for once, her senses hyper-aware of every face, every gesture. Keanu remained close, though he had exchanged his usual attire for a tailored suit that allowed him to blend with the guests while maintaining perfect freedom of movement. To anyone else, he might have appeared to be simply another attendee, perhaps Emily's date. Only she noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the room, how he positioned himself to monitor entrances and exits. "See anything unusual?" she asked, quietly as they stood near the grand staircase. "Several guests I can't account for," he replied. "Jack's team is running background checks, and your father's assistant seems nervous." Emily followed his gaze to where Sophie moved efficiently, among the donors, clipboard in hand, her professional smile firmly in place. "Sophie's always like that at these events. Perfectionist." "No," Keanu said. "This is different. Watch how she keeps checking her phone, then the time. She's waiting for something." Before Emily could respond, Richard appeared at her side, accompanied by an elegant older couple. "Emily, you remember Judge and Mrs. Blackwell?" The introductions and small talk that followed were a blur as Emily's mind raced. Sophie had worked for her father for only 7 years. She wouldn't have known Marcus. But she had access to everything in the Harrington household, including old records, photographs, family history. When she managed to extricate herself from the conversation, Emily searched the crowded rooms for Keanu, finally spotting him in quiet conversation with Jack near the library entrance. Their expressions confirmed her suspicions. Something was wrong. "We have a problem," Jack said as she approached. "Security cameras on the east side of the property went dark 10 minutes. Go deliberately?" Emily asked. Keanu nodded. "And Sophie has disappeared. She told staff she needed to retrieve something from her car but never returned." A chill ran through Emily, despite the warmth of the crowded room. "We need to find my father." "He's safe," Jack assured her. "I've got 2 men with him right now, but I think we should move him to the panic room." "No," Emily countered. "That's exactly what they would expect. If this is Marcus or someone working with him, they know this house, its security, its weaknesses." Keanu studied her with newfound appreciation. "What do you suggest?" "The boathouse," she said without hesitation. "It's not on any of the security plans because it was built after the accident. Dad never goes there, so it wouldn't be an obvious target." Jack nodded approvingly. "I'll get Richard there discreetly. You two check Sophie's office. She might have left something that could tell us what we're dealing with." As Jack moved away, the lights throughout the mansion flickered once, twice, then stabilized. A moment later, the music stopped abruptly, replaced by a discordant electronic tone that made conversation cease. Guests looked around in confusion as every screen in the house, from the security monitors to the digital photo frames, displayed the same image: a black rose. "It's starting," Keanu said quietly. Sophie's office was meticulously organized, betraying nothing of its owner's intentions. Emily searched the desk while Keanu examined the computer, which remained locked. "There has to be something," Emily muttered, frustration mounting as each drawer revealed only ordinary office supplies. Why Sophie? What connection could she possibly have to Marcus? Keanu paused in his examination of the bookshelves. "Maybe the connection isn't to Marcus. Maybe it's to you or your father." "What do you mean?" "People seek revenge for many reasons: loss of someone they love, destruction of something they valued." He turned to face her. "What exactly happened the night of the accident, Emily?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. Not her therapists, not her father. Certainly not the family friends who pretended the tragedy had never occurred. "Marcus and I took the boat out after dark," she began, the memories surfacing with painful clarity. "We'd been drinking, fighting. He was angry because I was leaving for school in London, ending our relationship. He became violent. When I tried to get away from him, he fell overboard. I tried to help him, but the current was strong and I nearly drowned myself." She swallowed hard. "At least that's what I remember. Trauma does strange things to memory." Keanu's expression revealed nothing, but his next question cut to the heart of her lingering doubt. "Do you believe he could have survived?" "The police said it was impossible. The water was cold, the current dangerous. His body would have been weighed down by his clothes, his shoes." Emily shook her head. "But if he did survive somehow, why wait 15 years? Why now?" "Because of the announcement in the financial press," came a voice from the doorway. "The Harrington-Westlake merger, the largest real estate deal in Boston's history." Emily turned to find Sophie standing there, a small device in her hand that she recognized immediately as a remote detonator. Behind her stood a man whose face Emily knew only from nightmares, older now, hardened by years and experience, but unmistakably Marcus Shaw. "Hello, Emily," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered. Surprise. Keanu moved with liquid grace, positioning himself between Emily and the newcomers. "This doesn't have to escalate," he said calmly. Marcus laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Oh, I think we're well past that point. 15 years past it, in fact." He gestured with a gun that Emily hadn't noticed until now. "Against the wall, both of you. Hands where I can see them." As they complied, Emily's mind raced through possibilities. Jack would realize something was wrong when they didn't return. Security would eventually notice the disturbance. But how much damage could be done in the meantime? "Why the theatrics, Marcus?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The rose, the surveillance, hacking the screens?" "Because I wanted you to know it was me," he answered simply. "I wanted you to feel what I felt, knowing something was coming but being powerless to stop it." Sophie stepped further into the room, her professional demeanor stripped away to reveal cold determination. Enough talking, we need to move, the charges are set. The word charges sent a wave of terror through Emily. What have you done? Created leverage, Marcus replied. In exactly 10 minutes, the east wing of this precious mansion will be reduced to rubble. Nothing lethal, I'm not a monster, but enough to send a message, unless of course Richard Harrington agrees to our terms. Which are? Emily demanded. He signs over his controlling interest in Harrington Developments to me, publicly admits his role in framing me for financial fraud 15 years ago, and acknowledges that he fabricated the story of my accident to cover up his crimes. Marcus's eyes burned with long-nursed rage. He destroyed my life, Emily, made me a fugitive from justice for crimes I never committed, all to protect his precious reputation and business. Emily's world tilted on its axis as years of carefully constructed narrative collapsed. That's not what happened. You attacked me on the boat. You fell. Is that what he told you? Marcus asked, genuine surprise crossing his features. Emily, I never laid a hand on you. We argued, yes. But what happened on that boat was orchestrated by your father. The drinks were drugged. When I began to piece together the evidence of his financial manipulation, he decided I was a liability. He's lying, Emily insisted, though doubt had begun to creep into her certainty. Am I? Marcus nodded to Sophie, who removed a file from her bag and tossed it onto the desk. Bank records, police reports, medical records that were buried, all proving that Richard Harrington systematically framed me, then attempted to eliminate me when that failed. Emily stared at the file, years of photographer's training making her notice details despite her emotional turmoil. Official. Letterheads, signatures she recognized, dates that aligned with her fragmented memories. Your father's been manipulating you your entire life, Emily, Sophie added, her voice softening slightly. Just as he manipulated everyone, including my brother, your brother, Jason Wells, junior accountant at Harrington Developments 15 years ago. He discovered the same financial irregularities Marcus did. He was found dead in his apartment 3 days later. Suicide, officially. Her bitter smile spoke volumes. I've spent 7 years working my way into Richard's inner circle, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. The pieces aligned with sickening clarity in Emily's mind. Her father's insistence that she not return to Boston, the gaps in her memory of that night, the way the family had closed ranks afterward. If what you're saying is true, why not go to the authorities? With what? Marcus asked. Your father owns half the judges in Massachusetts and has friends in every regulatory agency. We tried legal channels. That's why we need the public admission, the irrefutable evidence of his own confession. Keanu, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. The detonator. It controls all the charges. Sophie nodded warily. State of the art. Why? In one fluid motion, Keanu surged forward. Emily had never seen anyone move so fast. Before either Marcus or Sophie could react, he had disarmed Marcus and knocked the detonator from Sophie's hand. It skittered across the floor as Keanu engaged Marcus in a brief but decisive exchange of blows that ended with the older man pinned against the wall. Sophie lunged for the detonator, but Emily was faster, her decision made in a heartbeat of clarity. She snatched the device from the floor, backing away as Sophie froze. Emily, Keanu warned, still restraining a struggling Marcus. Don't. The moment crystallized around her. Keanu's steady gaze, Marcus's desperate anger, Sophie's grief-driven determination, and somewhere in the mansion her father, whose version of truth had shaped her entire life. I need to know, Emily said quietly. I need to hear it from him. Without waiting for a response, she activated the intercom on Sophie's desk. Dad? Can you hear me? Richard's voice came through immediately, tense with concern. Emily, where are you? Security says there's been a breach. I'm with Marcus Shaw, she replied, watching as shock registered on her father's face through the video feed that accompanied the intercom. He's alive, Dad, and he has some interesting stories about what really happened 15 years ago. The silence that followed was more damning than any confession could have been. When Richard finally spoke, his voice had aged a decade. Emily, whatever he's told you, Is it true?" she interrupted. "Did you frame him? Did you try to kill him to cover it up? Did you drug me that night so I wouldn't remember what really happened?" Another silence, then a sigh of capitulation. "I did what was necessary to protect our family, our legacy." The admission struck Emily like a physical blow. 15 years of guilt, therapy, nightmares, all based on a lie crafted by the man she had trusted most. "The merger documents," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Where are they?" "In my safe," Richard answered, confusion evident. "But Emily, you don't understand what's at stake here." "I understand perfectly." She turned to Sophie. "The safe in his study?" Sophie nodded. "Combination is his mother's birthday. I've seen him enter it." Emily met Keanu's gaze, seeing in it not judgment but understanding. "I need 10 minutes, she told him. "You have 5, he replied. "Then I'm coming after you." With Marcus still secured, Emily slipped from the office, the detonator clutched in her hand like a talisman. The mansion's corridors were chaos, security personnel directing confused guests toward exits, Jack Callahan's voice audible over radios coordinating a response to the unknown threat. She reached her father's study undetected, the room deserted. In the evacuation, the safe hidden behind a painting of the estate opened easily with the combination. Inside lay the culmination of Richard Harrington's decades of ambition, the merger agreement that would cement his legacy. Emily removed the documents, along with a USB drive labeled Contingency that caught her eye. Without hesitation, she slipped both into her evening purse just as the study door opened behind her. "Emily!" Jack Callahan stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "Your father sent me to find you." "Did he tell you why?" she asked, closing the safe on Jack's Silence was answer enough. "You knew," Emily realized. "All these years you knew what he did." "I suspected," Jack admitted. "But by the time I pieced it together, you were already gone, building a new life. What good would the truth have done?" "That wasn't your decision to make." The anger Emily had suppressed for years finally broke free. "You were like family to me, Jack. I trusted you, and I protected you the only way I knew how, by keeping you far from all of this." He gestured around them. "From becoming what your father became." Before Emily could respond, Keanu appeared behind Jack, his presence a wordless question. Emily nodded once, decision made. "I'm leaving," she told Jack, "and I'm taking these documents with me. The truth is going to come out, all of it." "And the explosives?" Jack asked quietly. Emily looked down at the detonator still clutched in her hand. With deliberate care, she placed it on her father's desk. "That's not who I am. No matter what." "He did. I won't become that." Jack studied her face, then stepped aside. "Go. I'll handle your father." As they moved through the now empty mansion, Keanu kept pace beside her. "What will you do?" he asked. "What I've always done," Emily replied. "Document the truth, but this time I won't be hiding behind the lens." By the time they reached the lakeside, where a boat waited at the private dock, Richard's security teams had discovered their departure. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness as shouts echoed across the grounds. Emily paused at the dock's edge, looking back at the mansion that had been both haven and prison. "You don't have to come," she told Keanu. "This isn't your fight." "I protect what matters," he replied simply. "That's you now." She studied his face, seeing in it a steadiness she had never found in her years of searching the world through her camera. "Why? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you chose truth over comfort, justice over revenge. That's rare." The approaching security teams left no time for further reflection. Together, they boarded the boat and cast off, the dark waters of the lake embracing them as they moved away from the lights of Harrington Estate. Behind them, the mansion stood intact, its secrets no longer buried but not yet fully exposed. Emily knew the path ahead would be difficult. Legal battles, public scrutiny, the painful process of rebuilding a life based on truth rather than carefully constructed lies. But as she watched Keanu navigate the boat with quiet confidence, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years, the weightlessness of freedom. The camera around her neck, once a shield, now felt like what it truly was, a tool for witnessing and revealing truth. "Where to?" Keanu asked as they reached the center of the lake. Emily looked up at the stars, bright and clear above them. "Forward," she replied. "Just forward." The Boston Globe headline read, "Harrington Empire Crumbles, Developer Faces Fraud Charges." Beneath it, a photograph Emily had taken herself. Richard Harrington being escorted from his offices by federal agents, his empire collapsing around him as decades of financial manipulation came to light. 6 months had passed since the night of the charity gala. The USB drive from Richard's safe had contained more than Emily could have imagined, detailed records of his illegal activities, kept as insurance against the partners he routinely betrayed. Combined with Marcus's evidence and Sophie's inside knowledge, it had been enough to launch a federal investigation that continued to uncover layers of corruption. Emily sat in a small cafe overlooking the harbor, reviewing photographs for her upcoming exhibition. Titled Constructed Truths, the series juxtaposed her documentary work from around the world with intensely personal images from the Harrington estate, a meditation on how reality could be manipulated through framing, context, and perspective. "The Times loved the preview," Keanu said, placing a cup of coffee before her as he took the seat opposite. In the months since their escape, he had remained by her side, his role evolving from protector to partner. "They're calling it revolutionary." Emily smiled, the expression coming more naturally now. Revolutionary would be never needing to expose corruption in the first place. "Too idealistic," he countered with the gentle directness that had become their familiar rhythm. "Says the man who fights for impossible causes." Keanu shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its simplicity. "Not impossible, just difficult." Their conversation paused as Emily's phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from Marcus, now working with federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity. "Testimony concluded. Your father's plea deal rejected. Trial scheduled for spring." Emily felt the familiar conflict, grief for the father she had loved, anger at the man he had proven to be. "He'll never see the outside of a prison again," she said quietly. "Does that bring you peace?" Keanu asked, not judging, merely curious. "Peace isn't the right word," Emily replied after a moment. "Clarity, maybe. The fog is gone." Sophie had found her own path to healing, establishing a foundation to support whistleblowers in the financial industry, named in her brother's memory. Last week, she had asked Emily to join the board, an offer Emily was still considering. Jack Callahan had disappeared after providing testimony that implicated himself in covering up Richard's crimes. Rumor placed him somewhere in Southeast Asia, but Emily didn't search for him. Some bridges, once burned, were better left as ashes. "The new security system is in place at the apartment," Keanu mentioned, shifting to practical matters. "And I've vetted the gallery staff for the opening." Emily reached across the table, her hand finding Keanu's. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know. The immediate danger has passed." Keanu turned his hand to hold hers, the gesture both protective and intimate. "Is that your way of firing me?" The hint of a smile softened his otherwise serious expression. "More like acknowledging that your job here is done," Emily replied. "You were hired to protect me from an external threat. That threat has been neutralized." "There are always threats," he said simply. "Some just haven't revealed themselves yet." Emily studied him, noting how the sunlight caught the angles of his face. Over these months, she had learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the almost imperceptible tells that revealed what his words often didn't. "That's not why you're staying, though, is it?" For a moment, Keanu was silent, his gaze steady on hers. "No," he finally answered, "it's not." The admission hung between them, significant in its simplicity. What had begun as an assignment had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Emily, who had spent years keeping the world at lens length, found herself drawing closer to this enigmatic man who saw through every defense she'd constructed. Their moment was interrupted by another message, this one from Claire, with whom Emily had reconnected during the investigation. Unlike Richard, Claire had been innocent of any wrongdoing, though the revelations about her father had shaken her deeply. "Claire wants me to come for dinner next week," Emily said, reading the text. "She's finally going through Dad's things at the estate." "Will you go?" Keanu asked. Emily considered the question. The Harrington mansion held so many painful memories, yet it was also the site of her most powerful reckonings. Yes, she decided. Some chapters need proper endings. The exhibition opening the following week transformed the gallery into a space where past and present converged. Emily's photographs, ranging from war zones to intimate family moments, at the Harrington estate, created a narrative of discovery and revelation that resonated deeply with attendees. As Emily moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and fielding questions, she noticed Keanu maintaining his customary vigilance from a strategic position that allowed him to monitor the entire space. But unlike before, he no longer seemed separate from her world. He had become an essential part of it. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd thinned, Emily found herself before the exhibition's centerpiece, a photograph of the lake at dawn, the mist rising from its surface, creating ethereal shapes that seemed to hover between worlds. It was the first image she had captured upon returning home, before everything changed. "It's beautiful," said a voice beside her. Emily turned to find Sophie elegant in a simple black dress, her expression more peaceful than Emily had ever seen it. "Thank you for coming," Emily replied. "It means a lot." "Your work tells the truth," Sophie said, studying the photograph. "Not just about what happened, but about how it felt. That's rare." Emily nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind Sophie's words. They had both been shaped by Richard Harrington's deceptions. Both had lost years to his manipulations. Yet somehow they had each found their way to a truth that allowed for moving forward. "The foundation is launching next month," Sophie continued. "The offer to join us still stands." "I've been thinking about it," Emily admitted. "Using my work to help others speak truth to power, it feels right." As Sophie moved away to speak with other guests, Keanu appeared at Emily's side, his presence a reassuring constant she had come to rely on. "Ready to go?" he asked quietly. Emily nodded, suddenly tired but fulfilled in a way she hadn't experienced before. As they walked toward the exit, she paused to look back at the exhibition, her past displayed for all to see, no longer hidden or disguised. "What now?" Keanu asked as they stepped into the cool night air. Emily considered the question, thinking of all the paths that had brought her to this moment. The frightened girl who had fled Boston, the guarded photographer who had returned, and now the woman who stood firmly in her truth. All versions of herself, reconciled at last. "Now," she said, "we write our own story." The lake at Harrington Estate was calm the day Emily returned with Keanu to help Claire. The mansion, stripped of Richard's influence, seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. In the months since his arrest, nature had begun to reclaim portions of the once immaculate grounds, wildflowers pushing through manicured gardens, vines creeping along stone walls. Claire greeted them at the door, her resemblance to Richard striking yet softened by a gentleness he had never possessed. "Thank you for coming," she said, embracing Emily. "It felt wrong to do this alone." The process of sorting through Richard's belongings was both practical and symbolic, deciding what to discard, what to donate, what few items held value beyond their association with a man whose legacy was now defined by his crimes. In his study, Emily found herself drawn to the painting that had once concealed his safe, a landscape of the estate as it had appeared decades ago, before Richard's ambitions had transformed it into a monument to wealth and power. "I'd like to keep this," she told Claire, surprising herself with the request. Claire raised an eyebrow. "Really? I thought you'd want nothing that reminded you of him." "It's not about him," Emily explained, studying the painting's delicate brushwork. "It's about what this place was before, what it could be again." As the afternoon wore on, they uncovered unexpected treasures, photographs of Emily and Claire as children, letters from their mother, mementos of a time before Richard's corruption had tainted everything. Among these was a small wooden box Emily recognized immediately, identical to the one Jack had given her years ago during her first visit to the dock. Inside was a handwritten note in Jack's familiar scrawl. "For when you're ready to see clearly." He knew, Emily realized, the pieces clicking into place. Jack was gathering evidence against Dad even back then. "That's why he brought you," she said, turning to Keanu. "He suspected your father might try to silence you if you ever learned the truth," Keanu confirmed. "Jack contacted me before he disappeared, asked me to ensure your protection continued regardless of the outcome." The revelation settled over Emily like the final piece of a complex puzzle. Jack Callahan, mentor, friend, and ultimately whistleblower, had been playing a long game, trying to right wrongs while protecting those he cared about. His methods were questionable, his execution flawed, but his intentions had been better than she'd believed. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" Claire asked. Emily shook her head. "Some ghosts are best left to rest." As evening approached, they stood together on the dock, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. Claire had decided to sell the estate. Too many memories, too much history, and use the proceeds to start fresh elsewhere. "What about you?" she asked Emily. "Will you stay in Boston now?" Emily looked at Keanu, who stood a few paces away, giving the sisters space, but remaining close. In him, she had found something unexpected. Not just protection or companionship, but a person who understood her completely, who saw her clearly without the need for explanations or defenses. "I think so," she replied. "At least for now. There's still work to be done here." Claire smiled knowingly. "It's not just the work keeping you, is it?" Emily's gaze returned to Keanu, who met it with characteristic steadiness. "No," she admitted, "it's not just the work." Later, as they walked along the shore, Emily felt a peace she hadn't expected to find in this place. The lake that had once held so much fear and darkness now reflected stars and moonlight, beautiful in its simplicity. 15 years, she mused. "I spent 15 years running from a lie." "And now?" Keanu asked. Emily stopped, turning to face him fully. The man who had arrived as her protector had become so much more, a partner in her journey toward truth, a constant in a world that had proven devastatingly changeable. "Now I'm done running," she said. "Now I want to build something true." Keanu's expression remained calm, but his eyes revealed everything his voice did not. "Truth isn't always comfortable," he warned. "Some people prefer the lies." "Not us," Emily replied with certainty. "Never us." As they stood together beside the water that had witnessed so much of her past, Emily felt the last pieces of her old self falling away. The camera that had once been her shield now hung at her side, a tool rather than a barrier. The fear that had driven her away now transformed into the courage that allowed her to stay. Keanu moved closer, his hand finding hers, in the gathering darkness. "Ready?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than their immediate departure. Emily nodded, turning away from the lake and toward whatever waited beyond. "Ready," she confirmed. Together, they walked away from the Harrington estate, leaving behind the shadows of secrets and deception. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Emily welcomed that uncertainty. With Keanu beside her and her own truth finally clear, she was prepared to face whatever came next, not through a lens, but directly, with open eyes and an open heart. The mansion stood silent behind them, its secrets exposed, its power diminished. The story of Richard Harrington had ended, but Emily's was just beginning. A story built not on constructed falsehoods, but on hard-won truth, not on isolation, but on connection, not on fear, but on the courage to remain present in her own life, fully and without reservation. And as they reached the car, Emily took one last photograph of the estate, not to document or to hide behind, but to mark the moment when her past finally released its hold and her future, uncertain but filled with possibility, stretched before her like an unwritten page.